Good luck. Enjoy.
And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We will be getting started in just a moment. We're going to give the room a little time to fill up. Antonie, good to see you.
Good to see you, Brandon. Good to see everyone. Good, very good. I just gave 2 workshops already today, so I'm totally in the groove today.
I was going to say you're absolutely in the zone in that case.
Yes.
Steffen, how about you? How are things with you today?
Good today. So I had to finish grading, which is less exciting, but it feels very exciting now.
Well, it's probably better to be on that side of the pin now as a professor versus being on the other side as a PhD student, perhaps.
I think it's actually for both sides a pain sometimes, yeah. So I think the students do not like it for doing the exams, but we do not like it either for the grading. So
that's so funny. Well, perspectives sometimes change and sometimes they don't. So well, great. Well, fantastic. We'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot of material to cover today, and of course, we want to have opportunity for everyone in the audience to ask questions. And so let's go ahead and get started, shall we? My name is Brandon Kirby. I am the Director of Marketing, Sales, and Admissions here at RSM. I work with the MBA portfolio as well as our executive education portfolio. And I do a lot of moderating of these sort of events, and it's something I really enjoy doing. And today is a topic that I'm really excited about. It's something that I believe in a lot. That, of course, is leading with presence. And we'll get into what we mean about that more specifically here in a moment. But the idea is to share tools to inspire and to influence those around you. And of course, that can be at the office. That could be when you're trying to go down to the store and negotiate a better deal, perhaps. There's a lot of different opportunities and a lot of different ways that you can use your presence to inspire and to influence others. Now, we do have a lot of material to cover today, and here we have the agenda. I'm briefly going to introduce formally our speakers, Steffen and Antonie. I'm going to share some housekeeping things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what leadership is to have a good basis to work from, talk about nonverbal communications, as well as what do we mean by presence. Antonie and Steffen are going to share a toolbox that they work with our students with and share some insights there. And then we'll finish up with the importance of voice. So there's a lot of things that we're going to cover today. So as I mentioned, I wanted to formally introduce Antonie and Steffen to the audience today. And Antonie, you are a trainer, a coach, a facilitator, an actor. I think it's really interesting because you work with a lot of corporate clients, you work with universities, you have 2 masters actually. When I first met you, I found this fascinating. You have a master in international finance and economics, as well as a master in fine arts, which is not a combination that you probably see too often. So it puts you at this wonderful intersection of business and creativity. So Antonie, welcome to you. Also joining us today is Professor Steffen Giessner, and he is a professor of organizational behavior and change here at Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University. You research a lot around organizational psychology and management, and you've been focusing recently, especially on nonverbal communication, as well as change management, leadership, team management. So again, a lot of great knowledge that you'll be sharing today as well. So pleasure to have you join us as well. And we have a picture of a third person on the screen. That's Millie Opdyne, who also teaches this course with the 2 of you. Unfortunately, she was unable to be with us today, but she is a trainer and an executive presence coach, and she has a professional background in performance and dance. And she also holds 2 degrees, one in social pedagogical studies and one in creative dance. So there's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of unique things that we bring to the table today, but also in the Leading with Presence course that the 3 of you teach together here at RSM. Just a few housekeeping items before we move forward. First off, we are recording this session for those of people who signed up but were unable to join. Don't worry, no one's names or anything like that will show up in the recording, but just want to let you know that we are recording it for posterity. One thing to note is Zoom has a new feature now. If you want, you can actually control the size of the screen sharing versus the image of the person speaking. So you should be able to slide that back and forth to make the image bigger or smaller. So please feel free to do that. I'll be sharing and stop sharing a few times along the way just to make sure that we have good engagement. Speaking of which, it's really important to engage with us. Otherwise, you're going to stare at a screen for an hour, and I doubt any of us need to do that more in our lives. So be sure to ask your questions, use the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put your comments in chat. As the moderator, I'll be bringing those questions into the conversation, and monitoring the chat as well. So feel free to put that in there. So with that being said, I think it's time to officially kick off the program. And Steffen, I'm going to come to you. And I think it's important as we're having this discussion to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what do we mean by leadership? It's a word that gets used quite often. We hear it a lot in stories that we see on LinkedIn, a lot of talk around leadership, but from your perspective, and I think it's a good place to start to have a foundation for the rest of the discussion, what do we mean by leadership? What is leadership?
Yeah, so thanks, Brandon, for raising that question. And it's indeed a very important thing for us to differentiate leadership from being a leader. So typically we always use leadership for leaders, but leadership in itself is not related necessarily to a person being in a leader or manager position. So leadership is much more seen from our side as a process of social influence, in which you try to influence other persons, to enlist the aid and the support of these persons towards the accomplishment of certain goals. And in that way, for us, leadership is much more of a process. And in that way, also one can see that leadership can be learned. So still, most often we hope that leadership, in a way, as a process, as a behavior, as a portfolio you have as a leader. Leaders who are in structural position should have the ability to exert leadership. But in itself, leadership is something different than a leader. So everybody of us can show leadership. There's informal leadership, for instance, we always say as well. So leadership is something you can learn, something you can enact, and it's not necessarily connected to a leader. And I guess lots of us know a lot of leaders who do not have the capabilities of showing leadership. So in that sense, also from our side, what we do and what we train is we train leadership. We train you in our way, what contributes to this. And it's a process of influence.
So do you find that when you start teaching people, are they surprised that leadership can be taught? I'm sure it's a split. Some people probably believe that you can absolutely teach leadership. Maybe you have some people who are perhaps more skeptical. What's been your experience when you tell students that, hey, leadership can be taught?
Yeah, I think there's the belief that leaders are born, and that belief is not necessarily wrong. There is some truth in that there are, we have, let's say, different starting points for certain positions, but it also depends on the leader positions itself. So, so there are some differences. We have some characters we have that may be easier for us to get in these positions or not. But actually, what we know from research is that most of what explains good leadership, effective leadership, is also something that can be trained, something that can be learned. And I think you see the audiences sometimes having these assumptions of it's being born with, but I think it's also very clear for everybody that part of that can be learned. And I think maybe sometimes it's more surprising to know that more of it can be learned than actually what we are born with. So in the end, it's a combination of that, but actually, for when it comes to leadership, more of this can be learned and can be taught. Sorry.
That's great. One quick question from the audience already. This is from Nick, who's saying they're coaching students on a leadership course themselves, and often they get asked the question, how do I lead from a non-leadership position? Any thoughts on how someone can exude and exert leadership if they're not in a place of positional power? I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we already have this term of informal leadership, for instance. These are persons we go to when we do not want to go to our leader. So we have this structural leaders in our organization, but very often we also have certain persons to go towards for feedback, for information. And certainly there are different aspects that explains that. We'll probably go a bit beyond what we want to do today and what we want to explain today. But there's certainly, for instance, expertise, but also a certain maybe presence, as we talk about today, that leads persons to actually go to this person and ask for advice. When it comes to leadership in itself, I mean, I always take this example where you can exert leadership. For instance, if you are with a couple of friends there and you want to go to a movie, sounds now like a nice thing to do nowadays, but if you want to go to a movie and you have to decide which movie you want to go to, leadership would be if you are the persons able to convince the others to go to the movie you like and not to the ones they like. That has to do with many facets. It has to do with expertise, but also your presence, what we talk about today.
Well, I think that's a fair point. And so I know we'll definitely get into that as well as we continue on. So definitely keep taking notes on ways that you can influence people from a non-leadership position. Speaking of influence, part of being a good leader is the ability to influence others, at least in my opinion, for what it's worth. And we can do that in a lot of different ways. So, but Steffen, I know you have some thoughts around influence and specifically around nonverbal communication as well. So maybe we can go into that here for just a moment and talk a little bit about influence and nonverbal communication. What does it take? Why is it important? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so one of the surprising things maybe of leaders or effective leadership is that those persons communicate a lot. Yeah, they communicate much more than these persons who are not so good in leadership. But communication is quite a wide field, and most often we think in terms of communication of the verbal part. Yeah, and also that's what we typically do in universities, in schools. We teach a lot of knowledge, we teach a lot of verbal aspects, but we do not pay a lot of attention on the nonverbal side. Maybe we let some students do some presentations, but that's pretty much it. But we do not really train people on their nonverbal side. And that's kind of surprising, because if we look at the research, we find that that nonverbal part of our communication has much more impact than the verbal part. And when it comes, for instance, on charisma, I typically ask students in the classroom when we discuss charisma, who's charismatic for you? What makes charismatic people? And most often there is a bit of silence, and then you get sometimes these sentences, yeah, somebody comes in the room and you feel that or you see that, but they cannot verbalize what it is. And they cannot verbalize it because it's most often related to this nonverbal side. And indeed, there are experiments on that where researchers manipulate the degree or the content of speeches, the delivery style when it comes like to presence, what we will talk today, and also whether leaders are successful or not, because we know all of these variables somehow have an impact on whether you see somebody charismatic. And indeed, research shows that all of these aspects matter whether somebody is seen as charismatic. So those people who provide visions content-wise, which are very visionary compared to non-visionary, are seen as more charismatic. Those leaders who actually are successful compared to those non-successful are seen as most charismatic. But on the delivery style, on the nonverbal part, it's also those who do better on nonverbal behavior are seen as more charismatic than the ones who are not so good. The important insights from this research is that this part is actually the strongest impact on your perceived charisma, more stronger than actually content, more stronger than actually whether you're successful or not. And in that sense, we would also like engage here in this side, and that's what we train, and that's what we actually engage in this nonverbal part on presence, on your presence, because we think this is much more important for your charisma.
Absolutely. A question coming in from the audience too, around culture, organizational culture, and how that can have an effect on things. And it's a question from Isabel, who's saying, are the leadership traits that can be taught, are they influenced by organizational culture or not? So they're using an example of saying, does a leader in a corporate organization look the same as a leader in an NGO? So maybe from the perspective of things we can teach, how much does organizational culture play in that? And then after that, we're going to go over to Antonie to talk a little bit about presence. But Steffen, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, there's some research that we have some kind of stereotypes or some kind of implicit theories on what a leader fits in what context, and they influence us in the beginning most often. But once we are in a context, it might change actually to whom we draw attention to. So once we are actually feeling that we belong to organizations, that might actually change. That said, I think the nonverbal delivery style, that has impact in all contexts. Yeah. Because if you have a bit more presence in an NGO versus in a corporate context, in both contexts, that should have a positive impact on that people listen to you. In that sense, I would say the nonverbal part is a rather general influence across context. Yeah, there might be certainly slight variations. I mean, we are in an online environment, yeah, where certain restrictions we have. So our gestures are more restricted. You cannot see our full body. Yeah. But certainly, nonverbal cues still matter and still have an impact on you. So I would say for that side, the nonverbal side still is a strong impact in all of these contexts.
That's great. So Antonie, let's switch gears for a moment, and let's talk about the other sort of part of today's presentation, which is about presence. And sort of the same idea, just to give us a good firm foundation to start the discussion on. From your view, what do we mean by presence?
So Stefan touched it already a bit. It's someone comes into the room and you just notice that person, but and we think it goes further than that. So part of it is being in the moment, right? The name says it, being present. So it's someone who has presence, is really able to connect with you, is really in the moment, not busy with an email they just got or a meeting they have afterwards. They're really there with you. That's one part of it for us. And the other part is the ability to use not only your verbal communication, but your body language and your voice in order to inspire others, to motivate others, to enthuse others, to influence others. And all those things combined make someone having presence. And I'm so glad Steffen talked about in terms of leadership. So we focus, yes, presence is extremely important for those who lead others, but even for self-leadership, presence is really important, especially if you, like Steffen said, have an informal leadership role. People will be drawn to you and will seek advice from you, or you'll be able to influence people in a positive sense of the word if you have more presence. So that's sort of how we define it: being in the moment and being able to motivate, inspire others, etc.
So now we know, but so what? I mean, so what are some things that we should be thinking about as it relates to presence? What can it affect? You have some thoughts here I have on screen. Maybe you can walk us through some of them and just tell us, what should we be thinking about with presence? How can it impact? Just talk us through what we see here.
Sure, yeah. So on the first sort of paragraph, how can you build a stronger presence? In the courses that we teach, and our whole sort of mantra is just to, first of all, have people become aware of their body language, and more importantly, how important that body language is in conveying your message. And I think everything we're saying right now is not rocket science, and it's a lot of people know this, but it's something else to apply it. Because I often see managers or other people at a corporation, at a business, think, well, my verbal message should be enough, or I have beautiful slides, with great, graphs and data, that should say it all, right? And I often hear from employees, because I go to companies and I train not only presence, I'll give, communication trainings, presentation skills, and I'll talk to employees and ask about leadership. And what they often say is that I hear great words, but I don't feel them. And that says to me, there's a discrepancy, an imbalance between what people are saying and what they're showing. So our entire passion and the tools we want to give is how to have what you're trying to say, whether it's to warn people, convince people, enthuse people, whatever your message is. We don't concern ourselves as much with the verbs, but with how you say it. What kind of body language are you exuding and conveying, and how can you use your voice in such a way that it not only balances what you're saying, but also strengthens what you're trying to say? That's sort of our passion. And so in terms of this, the second question, in terms of managing emotions and nonverbal behavior, we always say we're humans. We have emotions. They're going to be there. But we've all been in those situations when you've said something in a meeting, you walk away and you're like, oh, why didn't I say that? So why did I say that? Or you get an email, you get angry and you shoot an email back in anger, or you get nervous because you have to give a presentation to important stakeholders and nerves take over. We've all been there. And what we want to offer are some tools how to manage that. I mean, the nerves will be there. I'm nervous right now. I can't see the participants. It's live, it's exciting, it's getting recorded. It's just what I do with those nerves in order to have it work for me rather than against me. And that is something we, the three of us, Steffen, Millie, and I, offer tools for, how you can manage those emotions better and have them work for you.
That's a big part of it, because sometimes your emotions can get the better of you and force you to speak faster or slower or different things. And pro tip for those of you in the audience, you can set on your Outlook, if you use Microsoft Outlook, you can set a delay to your emails. And this is something I have on my inbox. I set a 3-minute delay on all of my emails. So in case I send something in haste or I'm mad at someone and like I have 30 seconds to calm down, I can always go into my outbox and pull that back before it even gets sent. So that saved me more times than I can count. So definitely,
Good tip.
think about that. Antonie, we have quite a few questions coming in around online, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about online now, or if you'd prefer to push it a little bit later.
No, whatever you want. So I can talk about, and Steffan's actually done research on it. So maybe Steffen can talk about the camera angle. But there's some. So since March, I've been obviously giving workshops online, and a lot of it's been centered on online presence. And there's just little technical things that you can do to make what we're doing more engaging, because many of you have heard of Zoom fatigue. There's research done that looking at all these faces staring at you can be exhausting. Seeing yourself is weird and disconcerting. It would be like we'd be in a meeting room and I brought a mirror with me and I held it next to me and you'd be like, oh, put that mirror away. So there's things that are just different online. One of the ways I think you can build a connection, it's real simple, is look into the camera. So the whole time now I've been looking into the camera while I speak. Of course, you're missing information because now I'm looking at you guys and I'm getting information. So I sort of fluctuate between speaking into the camera and looking at the reaction, speaking into the camera, looking at the reaction. And it will take practice. And then there are other things like the camera angle. Steffen, I don't know if you wanted to, because you did actual research on that.
Yeah, that probably also relates a bit like when we talk about nonverbal communication, that actually what we talk about is like how much our body influences our thinking. And that's a two-way side. So on the one hand, we draw a lot of information from the bodily information we get, like for instance, seeing our face, yeah? You can see the emotions in our face, and that's very easy. And actually we are reading a lot from faces of people. So in a way then on the online world, we see the face even more. So maybe it has even a more central meaning for us in reading one's face. And it's easy, I think, and everybody of us has this experience that we can pick up whether you are present now in this online conference whatsoever, or whether you do something else, yeah, because you can actually see whether you engaged in this camera, which is kind of a weird thing, but still, whether you do this or not. Another point where we have done research, for instance, angles on which you are seen, whether you are kind of portrayed a little from below or from above, has an impact a bit like, for instance, on your status perception. Because we relate, for instance, up and down to high and low status. We also say like top management and supervisor and subordinate, and that kind of relationship which is in our mind also has an impact, for instance, on camera angles. And that's, for instance, also important that we advise to have it on eyesight, yeah, and not like the camera up or below, that you give an impression of over empowering somebody or maybe being below somebody. So these cues still have an impact on the online environment. But as said, there's also some restrictions. Yes, our gestures we do not have. So one advice, actually, I took this from Antonie, is like that we concentrate a bit like taking our arms a bit up, that somebody can see our hands again, which would be a natural thing in a classroom for me or in a one-to-one talk. But if I otherwise am now online, most often my gestures would be not seen if I not take my hand a little bit higher and still use that in a conversation as I would normally do.
It can feel strange to do this because normally if I'm speaking, I would have my hands about chest.
Exactly, but they'd be out of the shot.
Now it's like I'm crazy, but that's what you have to do sort of in this world.
Exactly.
I think there's also some technical things to the question, because there's another question here asking, what skills do you need, when you're in this working from home model? What are some other things? I think lighting is a big one, even though it's not about charisma and presence, but it helps provide a presence, because we've all been on calls with people where the camera's shooting up their nose and it's super dark. And it's fine for kind of interdepartmental meetings, but if you have a meeting that's important, or you're doing a webinar such as this, Antonie and I both have lights, and I think Steffen does as well, and your camera as well. It does make, if you plan on working from home for a while, you want it to be crisp and clear, no different than your communication. So in addition to the things that, and we're going to get back into some present stuff here, but that's another thing I think, at least for me, and obviously a good microphone, because if people can't hear you, then it doesn't matter how charismatic you are. If they're always leaning in and, what are they saying? They're not going to listen to you because they're trying to understand what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Steffen, one more quick question here from the chat before we get back to Antonie with some more things to think about around presence. is, in your opinion, this question comes and it says, what constitutes great nonverbal communication? So what are some things that someone should aspire to do from a nonverbal communication standpoint?
I think that's a great question. So we would say typically we do not say there is like a general thing that we can advise that this type of nonverbal communication is the one you should always use and always effective. Yeah. Most often when we talk about presence is like that you are engaging with your audience. So you need to know your audience. You need to know the context where you're in. Sometimes it's helpful not to speak loud. Sometimes it's helpful to be very loud and very outspoken. And probably this is like the first step of bringing you into the situation, being in the moment. Yeah. That said, there's certainly also a part of where you can train a bit like your portfolio, your toolbox of behaviors. Yeah? And often we experience in our courses, we experience participants who, for instance, do not have a loud voice. And I think Antonie will say a bit more about the voice in a minute, but do not speak loud, but they think they speak loud. Let's say, when we ask them to speak a bit louder, they feel like they're shouting, but actually the audience in our classroom, they will actually tell them, no, this is now a normal voice. Yeah. So to a certain degree, one thing is like, you need to learn a bit more portfolio of nonverbal communication, of using gestures, knowing the space around you, knowing your emotions and how to make use of emotions, recognizing emotions of others, engaging with others, having eye contact. All of these things you would train a little bit. But which one is then the most effective still depends on the situation and the engagement with the audience in the situation and being present in the situation. So one of the experience we also have is like this kind of tension between authenticity and non-authenticity, that in the first place, you will learn a lot of and feel a lot of non-authentic because you learn a lot of new ways of communicating non-verbally. But in the long run, you learn that portfolio of behaviors, and then you will use it in the situation rightly when you engage rightly in the situation and be present, being in a moment in the situation. So I think that's our approach.
That makes sense. Just out of curiosity, really quickly, do either of you stand when you're doing online presentations? There's a question in the audience about, any comments on that. Antonie, you're shaking your head, so.
Yeah, I'm very much for standing. I haven't set it up, and I really want to, but the depth of my little office at home doesn't allow it. But if you can stand, I would. You'll be much more engaged and energetic. We sit for hours on end now online, and when I teach in the classroom at RSM, I'm 90% of the day I'm standing. So it energizes me. It allows me then to also move around a little, which is really good too. Also for memory, for thought process, for creativity. So if you can set it up that way, that's great. Just watch that the camera angle remains at eye level and that we're not looking up into your nose or down.
Yeah, it's just like you're being on a production. You need to know what the camera can see. So if you go way over here, are you out of screen or not? So you sort of have to be a little bit more aware, but it definitely makes you feel a little bit more free. Well, great. So let's get back into the presentation here, and let's continue on with what we were talking about before. But now let's move and really think about some tips about presence and how that can affect things. Again, we have some thoughts here on the screen. Maybe you can walk us through what we see here.
Yeah, sure. So the question was like, what are some like winning things? I forget the way it was worded for and one of the things is your posture, right? So there's research that the way we sit or stand has not only effect on ourselves, but even more importantly on others. So right now, as you see me sitting quite upright, the moment I slouch, which we have a tendency, especially online when we're in front of our laptop or computer, my body is giving a message to my brain, and it's not really an effective one. And even more importantly, if I'm trying to convince people or enthuse people, whether it's face-to-face or online, this is a posture that will be less effective, right? So if I'm sitting like this, when I'm with my buddies, of course I'll sit like this. Or when I'm at home watching a movie, I'll sit like this, to be honest. But when I'm giving a webinar or a workshop, or when I'm having an important meeting with clients or stakeholders, I use posture to embody that confidence, to embody basically presence. So the posture is a really important one. And then, as it says on the slide, vocal qualities. It's fascinating because the voice is such a powerful communication tool. And we all know these things because for those who have children, when we read children's stories, you would use your vocal qualities to its full effect, because otherwise your child is going to be like, Mom, Dad, this is a really boring story. So, and when you're regaling stories with your buddies at a bar before COVID, you would go, guess what happened to me? This and that, and you'd engage your body and your voice, and you're telling a story. But for some reason, when we get to the office, especially when we're nervous, our voice kind of flatlines in a way. It becomes really monotonous. And I'll talk some more about that when we get into the voice. But the main danger is a monotonous voice is a boring voice. And a boring voice has people wandering off thinking, what am I going to cook tonight? Or what am I going to watch on Netflix tonight? And you'll lose them because it's a boring voice. So, I think why not delve into this powerful communication tool everyone has and use the vocal qualities, especially if cameras are off. A lot of companies even have a policy of turning cameras off during meetings. But then you only have your verbal and your voice in order to communicate. So I think the first thing we do in our course is creating awareness of the importance, and then having people think about what they're embodying or exuding. So Steffen talked about this, like, how much space do you take up? We see a lot of people taking up very little space, and that allows others to sort of dismiss them. You can do that with your body or your voice. So if I speak with very low volume, you're going to be annoyed because you can't really hear me. But also you can go, oh, I guess what Antonie has to say is not really important, right? So, and after we've created awareness, we want to give people the tools in order to work on their posture, on their body language, and on their voice.
And at the bottom there, you're saying that early recognition helps speakers to take action. So is that knowing that you have a tendency sometimes to be nervous before you speak, or do you mean recognizing it as it happens? I mean, what do we mean by sort of recognizing things as early as possible?
Steffen, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the different ways on how you recognize things as early as possible. I mean, I guess, again, it has to do with being in a moment and being present and being engaging with your audience. And that sounds very easy and sounds very straightforward, but for many people, it's not. Yeah. So, for instance, when you come in a room and it's all kind of strangers, most often we feel uncomfortable and you actually do not look at anybody. Yeah. So you go to your place where you sit. And recognizing what's going on is important, that you engage with persons, that you connect with persons. And I think that's the first place to do and to learn as well. And it feels sometimes a very simple thing to do it, but it feels very hard to train that actually.
And there's a question here that's saying, it actually very perfect timing here. It says, you mentioned early recognition helps the speaker to take action. What action might that be? And, Antonie, you've been on screen, you've been on stage, I recommend going to check out his IMDb page. Sorry, I always like to mention it, but it's kind of funny to have someone that I know with an IMDb page. But, what are some things that someone can do? And you might get into this a little bit more here in a moment. So maybe it's a good segue into the toolbox. But what can someone, what's one thing someone can do to take action if they feel something? Like what experience do you have with that?
Yeah, so starts and endings are always awkward, right? Especially online. I mean, I'm sure you all recognize, so you have a meeting and people are kind of meandering in, and that's sort of like, hello, everyone, and then, yeah, and it's always awkward. It's always, and if you're leading that meeting, you want to welcome people. You want to make things relaxed. And even if it's a serious meeting and then you're going to, get down to the agenda, the beginning will set the tone, right? So I think everyone has a certain responsibility in a meeting to self-manage their nerves. And so an action, immediate action would be, and it is a beautiful segue into the next part, Brandon, is to for instance, ground yourself and to start breathing lower, because three things happen when people get nervous. Your breath will go up, your voice will go up, and your tempo will go up. So it'll sound like, hi, everyone, welcome to the webinar. We're going to talk about presence, and it'll sound like that. And what we try to convey to people is the more present you are, the more relaxed you are, the more relaxed your audience will be. Because if you're nervous, they will become nervous. If they weren't before, they will definitely become nervous. So your shallow breath will usually cause others to have a shallow breath. So in immediate action, you see the on the screen here, is the toolbox that the three of us have developed, and that's sort of the framework of our course and our book. And there are sort of really quick ways to quickly get back your presence. So one thing is to just do grounding, right? So to put your feet flat on the floor, whether you're sitting or standing. I always do this in meetings, especially it's 4 p.m. You've had 6, 7, 8 meetings already. You're tired. You want to get that focus back, and you want to get that energy back. The sooner I ground, a couple of things happen. I'm doing it right now. My voice drops. I tend to speak slower, and my breath drops. It becomes fuller. So I'm excited to do this right now, right? And I want to tell you a lot. I'm looking at the time. We only have 20 minutes. I want to come down, though, because I want everyone, the viewers, to get all the information. So what I recommend as an action before any meeting, before any presentation, is first of all to ground yourself. That's our step one. And we'll give you the tools in the course, but it's basically a sense of rooting yourself into the ground. You know, like the trees, like the roots of a tree. You can think the same. We tend to like working with images, is having the tree roots grow through your legs, through your feet, into the floor. That one works with me instantly. And the next one I talked about a little is aligning, right? So alignment means basically not slouching, and it's not a military stance. So everything is still relaxed and nimble, but you're exuding that way much more presence. You're giving yourself and others much more confidence. You're able to instill trust. And this posture just is going to be much harder to do that. So if I say this way, I'm really, really happy to be here, that's a very different way than saying, I'm really, really happy to be here. It just will land really differently. So one way to think about it is the little rope at the middle of your head that's gently pulling you with, say, a balloon at the end of the rope, gently pulling you towards the ceiling. And everything's still relaxed. And then the third one is a really important one, is the breath. Because as I said, when we're nervous, we tend to only breathe here and it becomes very shallow. And just to draw some big breaths from your diaphragm really helps with your voice, and especially exhaling. That's the most important thing. So having a big, deep breath and then exhaling. And that's what gets the nerves out. That's what helps me and many others manage emotions better. And then connecting, which is the last part, when we're teaching face-to-face, we mention, how do you connect with the space? Do you take enough space? How do you connect with your own space, with the space around you? And most importantly, especially for leadership, is how do you connect with others? I think as a human being, one of our primary needs is to be seen and acknowledged for our talent, for what we do, and for who we are. And I think as a leader, you can do great detriment by not connecting with your employees, with those you lead. Now, online, as I mentioned, I look at the camera, but face-to-face, that would translate to eye contact. And a lot of people find eye contact very uncomfortable. And what I'm not talking about now is freakishly staring into people's eyes, because that would be creepy, but just to connect with them. However long, I can't say, a lot of people ask us, how many seconds? I'm like, I don't want to get technical like that, just connect with them. And some, it takes 2 seconds, and some it'll take a little longer. And then just to really look at people and see them. It's so important for people to be seen. And so those 4 things, if you start practicing, and we have a lot of exercises in our course to really practice it and have it ingrained in you, but this takes a lot of practice. And then it becomes part of just who you are, so that if it's 4 o'clock and you're nervous and you have a webinar to give for RSM and you've already have 2 workshops, and I did it before. I did it at 2 to 4. I did grounding. I did all these steps because I want to have, I mean, we have to set the example, Steffen and I and Brandon. So, so we did all those steps right before everyone came on.
It's funny because Antonie, you and I have done presentations together before, and we always talk about that. And whenever he talks about posture, I always find myself like secretly like, make sure I look good here. So
you did great, Brandon.
Yeah, so you definitely had an impact on me. And I think one other thing, especially when you're talking about being online, it's not always the presence of when you're speaking, but when you're receiving information. And we've all been in meetings where someone is, doing this, and I've had to text colleagues on the side to say, look, you're really showing your frustration on this topic. You might want to smile. And it's funny to see someone kind of go from this to, oh, hey. So it's tough sometimes because you're in that zone of listening. And, again, if you were in a room, you would know that other people would be looking at you. But sometimes you forget that, and we've probably been on meetings where people forget that there are other people in the room and, or drinking a glass of water or eating. So you can also have presence when you're not speaking and you are listening. So I think that's important as well.
Absolutely.
Now, Steffen, let's talk a little bit about poker face. And when I was helping to assemble the presentation for today, I almost put a picture of Lady Gaga behind this particular slide because of poker face, but I thought it might be a little too obscure of a reference. So talk to us about poker face, the difference between surface acting and deep acting. Love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we very often actually get the question on people actually want or join our workshops to learn about a poker face. Yeah, we personally do not like that, and we do not necessarily train the poker face in that sense, but we actually train something that allows you to show something you would probably name the poker face. But the whole idea of a poker face is like the idea of that you have certain emotions and you do not want to show them. You want to suppress them. And that's what we would call surface acting. Yeah, so you feel a certain emotion, you feel a certain feeling, but you do not try to show that. So your outside behavior is not the same as your inside feel, and that's work. It's a lot of work you have to engage in. It's probably so much work that you cannot really have much capacity to concentrate on what some people are saying there or what people are doing. You just cannot actually work so much. You have a limited capacity to actually engage in that. So in that sense, a poker face in that sense wouldn't be effective from our point of view to learn. Yeah. What makes much more sense is like something of a deep acting that you actually feel, let's say the poker face, namely most often we relate a poker face with being kind of neutral, not having an emotion, so that you feel that. And in a way that what Antonie just said on this toolbox, which is like, not like that you have to be like always like that, but always coming back to this, that would allow you to have like a neutral face, kind of to relax a bit, yeah, getting your emotions down, and then in a way engage with people. Yeah, in a way it provides you then with a neutral face, which is probably the poker face many people want to have. But we would never really recommend people engaging in this kind of poker face of really surface acting, feeling something different from what they want to show. We would rather focus on that you engage in the feeling you want to show. And if it's a neutral one, then the toolbox might be a very handy thing to engage in, to get your emotions down, breathe through, relax. And then you have like a relaxing face. And that could be seen as a poker face by somebody else. But for yourself, it's just a neutral face you can have.
And it's a fine line between having a poker face, I'm guessing, because you want people to at least believe that you're listening to them. You don't want to be this stone-faced person that people are wondering if it's bouncing off your head or if it's listening in. So I'm guessing that, as you walk people through that part of the program, it's something that you can actively work on and try. A lot of good questions coming in. I think this one is a perfect segue to the next section. So Antonie, I'm going to take this one to you, and then we'll talk about the importance of voice, and we'll spend the rest of the time just answering some of the questions that we've had coming through here. This question comes from Christina, who says, speaking louder seems like a simple solution, but what if you have a naturally quiet voice, or you talk in a higher pitch, but might not be heard as well? And she says, I mean, specifically women here. So what can we do to get the audience to work with what has naturally been given to us? So our quiet voice, a voice that is higher pitched, instead of trying to shout or talk more like men in a lower voice. And I think there has been studies that show that lower voices, even in women, are more successful in business. The whole, I forget her name now, and I'm putting myself on the spot.
Thatcher, probably, you mean? Or...
Yeah, the woman that was recently.
Oh yeah, of the oh god, the thing that got debunked. I forget her name, but yeah, she had training.
Anyway, so the voice. So again, just to sort of segue into the next section, what can someone do to, I don't want to say to work around, because that implies that it's a negative, but what can you do to work with what you've been given naturally?
Yeah, so and Steffen can talk more about the research of the effect of your voice, especially the pitch or register of your voice. So what I'm not ever prescribing, what we don't prescribe, like you have to sound like me, for instance, right? But if you naturally have a high voice, it implies that that's the only voice you have. And what we do in our course and in all our work is have you explore other registers of your voice. So for instance, for those who have children, when you've asked your children to clean their room 10 times, the 11th time, I doubt you're going to say it this way. No, I really want you to clean your rooms now. You're going to go like this. No, enough. Now you're cleaning your room. You're going to go low, because then the kids go, ooh, mom or dad is serious right now. So what we just want to have people do is see the possibilities there are. And when, like I said, when you read children's stories, you're going to imbue all the different characters with different voices, right? So there'll be an angry sort of character in the story, and there will be an innocent sort of, like Winnie the Pooh is a great one, where Winnie the Pooh might talk like this, and Rabbit might talk like this. So, and my understanding of what I have of the voice is everyone can do that. So we all have a lower pitch, and of course, you're never going to get the lower pitch, or unlikely, of a man, because that man's body and vocal cords are all different. But everyone as a woman can have a lower pitch as well. So that's one thing about just the lower voice. And then in terms of volume, I mean, Steffen already said that we encounter this a lot. So when people say, yeah, but my voice is just softer, my only concern is if people can't hear you, they will get annoyed. And you're sort of giving the signal, you know what, you don't have to listen to me. What I have to say is not important. So both are not really effective for communication. So my whole passion is I want people to be heard. And that's why I will work on them with volume. In our course, like Steffen says, it happens a lot when people who have less volume, we have all these exercises to explore more volume. And we'll ask the class and we'll say, was this person screaming? And never someone has said, yeah, that was awful. They'll say, no, now you sound confident. No, now I can understand you. No, now I can hear you. And I think our voice is, of course, influenced by our culture. Some cultures, tend to take up less space, and it's impolite to use a loud voice. Where I am from in America, we tend to have so much louder voices. I don't know if Brandon agrees. We just want people to explore the potential of their voice. And then maybe, Steffen, that goes something with the deep acting, because I would, if we have a chance, Brandon, to talk about the surface acting versus deep acting.
Yeah, probably I also want to add to that. Actually, I think what's much more important than just focusing on deep voice only is, first of all, whether you have congruency with what you want to say. Yeah, if you're excited, yeah, a deep voice might be actually not very helpful in getting your message across. So you have to be congruent between what you want to say and how you say that. Yeah. So in that sense, again, also the deep acting helps you feeding the right emotions, and then naturally you typically express it as well. Yeah. The second point is more like the variety, which matters much more in the impact a message has than just a deep voice. If somebody has a deep voice all the time and brings the message monotonously with the deep voice, it's also not helpful. So like this assumption of women have higher voices and that kind of is disadvantaged. Therefore, I would say this is not generally true. I think more important is like that point of variety and training your voice, which women and men have to do. You also have men who speak very loud, and it can be very annoying as well. Yeah. So I would say the variety and congruency in your message is important, and to learn a bit like, and that's for every individual, whether it might be man or woman, but just to increase your portfolio in ability to even you have like the pitch range you can have, yeah, to train your pitch range from low to high. And your individual pitch range of low might be not as low as another person, yeah. But you can train the range you have, and that you can do, yeah. And with the training of congruency and variety, I think this is like a good setup you can have, and that's what we probably also learn in the course.
Yeah, that's a great addition that I want to reiterate. It's the variety of your voice that makes the voice engaging and interesting. So I'm glad, thank you, Steffen, for adding that note. I don't mean to imply at all you have to speak always in a lower voice. In general, lower voices are more convincing. So if you're trying to convince someone, I don't think this voice would be as effective as this voice. But in general, the ups and downs and difference in tempo of speaking, using pauses, using different volume, emphasis, all those vocal tools is what makes a voice engaging and interesting and effective and powerful.
No, that's true. I'm glad you mentioned the pause part, because that was something I was going to mention just as an aside, that if speaking lower, speaking higher isn't something that works for a particular individual, pauses are a great way to bring people back to listening to you and to really create that point of emphasis. It has nothing to do with the dynamic range of your voice. So if you feel that you would be pretending to try to go lower, and you just work into pauses. And I think there are plenty of people who don't have, the James Earl Jones, Morgan Freeman style voice that are absolutely effective. It's just, you might have to find different ways to do so. So Antonie, it's a good segue into the voice. I'm going to put this back up on screen. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll go through here, then we'll bring in some questions from the audience and wrap it up. So you've already touched upon some of this, but we know the voice is important, but why and how can we use it? Talk to us about the voice.
So we already mentioned pitch and tempo. The main thing, besides having variety, is be careful not to speak too fast. So if you're conveying new information, my advice is, especially if it's important information, to slow it down a little, because it's new information and people have to process it. Your listeners and viewers will have to process it. If it's something you've said a couple times already, you can speed it up a little. And then people forget about, and glad you mentioned, Brent, the power of pauses. Whether you agree with his politics or not, but Obama is a master at this. He will say something and then just stay in connection, whether it's in the camera or looking at people. And what we often say is the message still goes on in the silence. So especially for determination, if you're trying to convince people of something, pauses can be really powerful. A lot of times they'll snap people into attention, but also they really can reinforce your message. The point is to play with that, to play with the tempo. And then emphasis is a really great one as well. And you can use emphasis by the previous two and volume. So by changing your pitch, by changing your tempo, and by changing your volume, you create emphasis. And if there's something in your sentence that is specifically very important, putting an emphasis on that will only strengthen that message. And I often, because I learned a lot of Shakespeare and I performed Shakespeare, emphasis is really important with Shakespeare. So I learned how to play with the words and what words do I want to emphasize. And everyone can do that. So these are just some tools for you to think about, to make more use of, because they're all at our disposal. And then finally, real quickly, we also color our voice with certain emotions, right? So whether it's enthusiasm or determination or compassion. And sometimes we have people saying, sometimes I have to present and it's slides I didn't make, or I don't really stand, but how can I still find that enthusiasm? So one thing, the imagination can really help. Thinking about something that you're enthusiastically about, like for instance, I haven't traveled in a year and a half. I'm really excited to visit my family in America. I will think, just thinking about that, creates a smile. It creates a certain voice and body language with me. So if you're having to present something or convey a message that you have to relay with enthusiasm, right before, just think of something that makes you happy. The body usually responds and will help you to color your voice with certain emotions.
That's great. It's always important to do that. into practice, because sometimes you might not get it the first time because you're learning your material. And the more comfortable you become with something, the easier it is for you to on the fly or, prepare ahead. So I think that's a fantastic point. We've got about 5 minutes left. We have a few questions here in the chat. One comment, this one is a good one, saying that going back to the whole notion of soft voice or not, and it's more of a comment, but it says, in my experience, it's about being centered and grounded in whatever the topic is when you speak. A soft voice can be solid, and making sure you have a microphone helps. So there's no need to be louder. And I think that's right. If you're true to yourself and to who you are, and you're authentic, and you show your interest or passion or enthusiasm about your topic, whether you're speaking loud or soft or high pitched or low pitched, I think you can still get your message across, but you really do need to especially connect with your topic and connect with the audience in front of you. Steffen, here's a question for you, saying, how do you manage over-enthusiasm? I guess this person is a student. It says, how do you manage over-enthusiasm as a student with poker face? They wanted to have a little more clarity on, how do we not let our emotions get the better of us?
Yeah, so I think the first point would be not to work against the emotions, but rather bring your emotions down first. Yeah. So, and what Antonie explained, what we train with the toolbox of grounding, aligning, and then breathing, yeah, especially the breathing, helps you to actually get your emotions a bit down. Yeah. Make your emotions less strong. And with this one, you actually automatically come to a phase that is much more relaxing. Yeah. Otherwise, when you have strong emotions and try to suppress it, that we would not advise. Yeah. So just actively working against the emotion by just moving your face differently than emotions want to do, that would be not a way to go. But rather, you first inside your body, in a way, you have to work first down to bring your emotions down, and then the face automatically follows. Yeah. So that is a bit like the difference between the surface and deep acting. And maybe I can also give just one little comment to what you just said. This interesting, we would still say, yes, we fully agree that grounding and being in a moment, and so it's important. And yes, we fully agree with that. At the same time, we also say, you need to learn a bit more on your portfolio of nonverbal behavior, because one of the findings we have as well is, like, when you feel authentic, it's not necessarily that other people see you as authentic. Yeah, and that has to do that maybe you have not enough portfolio of nonverbal behavior. You show not everything, and that might be restricting you. So I think both ways are important, that you learn a little bit more how you can make use of your voice, and the more ability you have in that, the more you will use it right. Yeah. So the better you can use it right. So I think both in a way are true. Yeah.
Well, it's a great point, and it's one of why I particularly love this program, is because it involves science and research and is backed up by statistics and numbers, and people such as yourself who put a lot of effort into looking at these things. And then we move it also into the practical application and bring that in as well. So I think that's something that is really unique about that. And Steffen, I'm going to stay with you for this next question, and I think we'll have time for one more after this. And thank you to Andreas, who's waited patiently for about 20 minutes for me to work it back into the conversation. So thank you, Andreas, for that. How can you use effectively body language online? We spoke a little bit about it before, about having hands up here. Anything else to add? We might have already covered it, but Steffen, anything else to add from your side?
I mean, there are two ways. The one way we talked a little bit on that was like how you use gestures, how you use your body to convince others in the conversation. Yeah, how you can actually look into the camera and like that. But one way as well is using your body to actually be in the moment yourself. Yeah. So typically, like sitting aligned and straight, or standing, for instance, what we suggested. So when you engage more in the situation, are more actively in that talk, in that meeting, yeah, you also have much more awareness of what's going on and see what's going on. So there's two ways: focusing on your own body, that you are active, that you're grounded well, that you align well, that you sometimes breathe through to get your voice down, and have the right emotions to engage with the audience, yeah, to pick that up. And the second point is also see whether you can actually have your position of the camera on eye level. Use your hand a little bit when you engage with the audience. Sit straight. People will also see that. They will see that you have the right emotions in your face. That's probably the most visible. And your voice is very important, as just Antonie explained as well.
That's great. Antonie, last question for you. There's a great question in chat, but it's going to take more time than we have. And that is, how does presence differ from mindfulness? So we'll have to come back to that one somehow. Don, it's a great question, but I don't think I'm going to be able to bring it in just to be sensitive to everyone's time. But I will ask this final question to you, Antonie. It says, Mike says, in my opinion, alignment posture is very important. However, it must be said that a relaxed posture can sometimes be very positive to an audience. Being that leadership is individual, and some people may react better than others with a casual versus, stricter posture, is it important to know your audience and how to determine what approach you should take to be received in the way that you want to be received?
Yeah, and Steffen also consider, because he talks a lot about knowing your audience, but what I mean with alignment is not stiffness. So I can be very approachable. I think actually presence means you're still quite approachable, but you're just present. And as I said, when I'm with my buddies and my friends, I can sit slouch and sort of sit back and be all chill like that. And of course, if you find that it works for your audience, please by all means use it. But I think in order to enthuse people or motivate people, we find it's less helpful. But we never would imply that sitting upright, there's any stiffness, right? So it's not a military stance. You're still sort of, nimble and energetic and relaxed, but you're just conveying a body language that's much more present. That's what it's, and so you can still be relaxed, I think, while being present and aligned. That's where the distinction for us.
So home stretch here, I'd like to first off thank Steffen and Antonie for being with us today. I have here on screen the book that you all have just recently released. I'm going to ask one of my RSM colleagues to put the link in the chat that will take you to be able to purchase the book and actually get a discount. So you can get a 30% off discount for that if you would like. And then of course, for those of you, if you're interested in learning more about this and to sitting in on the course, we actually have a course called Leading with Presence that features Steffen, Antonie, and their partner, Millie. And it's a more in-depth dive. This is just kind of a taster of the kinds of things that you can expect from the course. I can tell you it is one of our most well-attended programs throughout the year because it can be applicable to everybody. And of course, we have the link for more information on that as well. So, gentlemen, thank you both so much for taking time out of your days, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your research, for talking about this topic. It's something that all three of us care a lot about. As someone like me who also does a lot of presentations and standing up and speaking, it's something close to my heart as well. So thanks to the two of you for being here. I'd also like to thank everyone in our audience for joining us as well and for learning more about leading with presence. We look forward to speaking with you soon, to welcoming you back to our campus soon. Perhaps maybe coming up in May, which is the next time we run the program. Other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. If you're here in the Netherlands, enjoy the sun because the weather has certainly been crazy the past few days, and have a great evening. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.